So, some are looking at the current global situation, and yes, they're saying, yes, the US needs to increase its production. But there's the other side of this is, we also are seeing the focus more in Europe than in the US, but the focus on diversifying our energy needs with renewables. And then, the idea that this is part of security issue is not being too dependent on oil. And we know that Russia did behave in a way to make sure that inventories would be really tight going into the winter of this year for Europe. And Europe put themselves in that position as well. And we can debate all the politics of that, but geopolitics at this point in time. But now there clearly is a big move by Europe, really seems to be moving there in terms of wanting to diversify more into renewables, even talking about bringing nuclear back online or building new kinds of nuclear plants to provide for and not make them as dependent on a particular country like Russia for their energy needs. The U.S., we hear the former CEO of Ford has said that, the crisis is going to accelerate the adoption of electric vehicles. And I think about that and, yes, it will, but, from where to where? I mean, how many of us can actually afford an electric vehicle? Where's the infrastructure in the United States for an electric vehicle? And so how do you see the sort of renewable side of this equation evolving here in the United States? It's a very different equation, I think, than Europe. And even then, there's issues of climate change. How do we deal with that? And energy companies wanting to be energy companies regardless of what kind of energy they provide. So they want to be in renewables as well. And on some of them, all of them are not going to be. And you don't want to get in a situation in a transition. You want it to be, it's something that comes up a lot in economic circles is how much friction and, what kind of discarded infrastructure do you have if you're not using all of your infrastructure productively anymore because you've switched a kind of energy. And I don't really see the carrot and the stick that is necessary to have that happen rapidly. And we can debate whether that's right or wrong, but the reality is it's not there right now. But what do you see evolving in the energy industry that you're seeing come down with regard to, the SEC just came out with new rules on ESG that companies have to follow, in recent days. And I heard Mark Carney, who former Bank of England, former Bank of Canada governor, both, but also very focused on climate change investments. And he's looking at 130 trillion globally, making investments in both the transition away from carbon fuels, which may include carbon fuels in the process of transitioning, to also adhering to what he would like to see is more transparency on ESG environmental rules going forward. And he welcomed that, with open arms. But what does that mean for our energy industry right now?
Yeah, there's certainly a visceral reaction from many industries to go green and go green immediately. There's no doubt the desire to accelerate the transition is there. Unfortunately, or said differently, that it's not technologically, economically, or politically possible or feasible to do that immediately. You can't just flip the switch. It takes all.
That's always strikes me, is people think that they don't think about the cost benefit of the transition itself. What do you see in terms of that for energy producers, how they deal with it? Isn't just a flip of a switch, and there is clearly all these vested interests out there. How do you see that playing out?
Well, there is no long-term strategic U.S. energy policy. There have always been a lot of initiatives and short-term guidance put out by various administrations, but this is really the opportunity for the U.S. to kind of be a leader in terms of setting what that policy is and how all the various sources of energy, solar, nuclear, wind, hydro, even oil and gas, and possibly coal, might be brought together to have the optimal solution. If we got in an ivory tower and tried to do something academically, it might not really be possible to model all the contingencies. We come up with a mathematical or a academic answer, of course, but there are so many different uh, influencing groups and factors that are coming into play right now that the solution is going to evolve based on governments, based on the majors, based on investment. Whether that's capital markets on Wall Street or private equity or both.